The job of SEC commissioner is largely to be a watchdog, to make sure that the public is protected and the markets are honest and fair. After the financial crash of 2008 showed us that Wall Street was out of control, Congress passed Dodd-Frank to try to rein them in. And the SEC was directed to write or enforce dozens of rules to protect our financial systems. Now, Ms. Peirce, in the past few years, you've attacked many of those same rules. For example, you edited and contributed to an entire book called Dodd-Frank, What It Does and Why It's Flawed, which criticizes several SEC rules required by law. You wrote that the Volcker Rule, one of the key provisions to deal with too big to fail, quote, requires regulators and industry to pour countless hours into an effort that may end up impairing rather than shoring up our financial institutions and our markets. It's nothing to celebrate. You wrote that Congress should, quote, perform major surgery, close quote, on Dodd-Frank to reduce its directives to agencies, and you argued that the SEC, quote, is a prime candidate for mandate trimming. You have described the CEO pay ratio disclosure rule and the conflict minerals disclosure rule, two SEC rules that are required by Congress as, quote, pointless Dodd-Frank mandates. What you propose, as best I can tell from your writings, is less oversight of big banks, fewer efforts to rein them in, more chances for them to take on big risks, boost their profits, and if things go wrong, come crying to the government for another bailout. Now, you are certainly entitled to your opinion and to express it as loudly as you want. But the question is whether someone should be put in charge of enforcing laws that they think are unnecessary or counterproductive. You know, no one hires a watchdog who isn't committed to enforcing the rules. So I want to ask, what kind of watchdog will you make if you believe that parts of Dodd-Frank are, and I'm quoting you, pointless, and you think that Congress should repeal much of it?
Senator, I certainly understand your concern, but I wrote those comments not in the context of a regulator charged with implementing the rules, but in the context of an academic researcher whose goal is to suggest a financial regulatory architecture that will work better at protecting investors and ensuring that people take responsibility for their own behavior. The reason I don't think you need to be concerned is that I was a regulator. I was a regulator for 8 years, and I was able to do the job. And certainly in asking you to confirm me for this job, I'm not asking you to confirm me to not implement rules, but to implement rules. And in fact, the time that I spent here on the staff was very useful in teaching me the importance of regulators adhering to what Congress tells them to do. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with a regulator saying, we're going to do this as you asked us to do. We do have concerns, but we're going to do this. And that's what I would do if I were there. I would work on implementing the rules as best as they could be implemented and pointing out where I thought there might be issues that Congress should look at again. But until Congress looks at those again, the responsibility of the agency is to enforce the rules.
Well, I have to say, I assume anyone who wants the watchdog job would say exactly that. But an SEC commissioner has a lot of tools that can be used to undermine all of Congress's mandates. You can delay the rules, you can water them down, you can look the other way when it's time to enforce them, and frankly, there won't be much that Congress can do about it once you're confirmed. And that's a real concern for me, because in April 2014, the D.C. Circuit rejected a challenge to the SEC's congressionally required conflict minerals rule. And shortly after the court's ruling that the SEC could act and that Congress had required it to act, you took a very different view. You tweeted, just because the court isn't stopping SEC from requiring immediate compliance with conflict minerals rule doesn't mean the SEC shouldn't stop itself. Now that sounds like you believe SEC commissioners can and should ignore the law, that the watchdog should look the other way. So I want to be absolutely clear on this. If you are confirmed as a commissioner and a congressionally mandated Dodd-Frank rule does not fit with your personal view of the SEC's mission, are you now saying that you will do everything in your power to effectively implement and enforce that rule?
Certainly, and sometimes effective implementation requires delaying so that companies are able to implement it properly.
So delays sounds like you've left yourself a lot of room here.
When the SEC crafts rules, one of the things it does is it sets implementation periods, and it does that in a way to make sure that industry is going to be able to get on board in a way that's effective and achieves the objectives of the rules. And if I were to be confirmed, my goal would be to work with the staff of the commission and the other commissioners to figure out the most effective way to implement the statutory mandates given by Dodd-Frank and other statutes. That would be my job as a commissioner.
Thank you. Congress mandated that no more than 3 out of 5 of the SEC commissioners can be members of the same political party. And so long as that is the case, we're going to have Republican commissioners and Democratic commissioners, and they will invariably have different views about the job. But there is a big difference between disagreeing about how best to implement a law and actively sabotaging the law. Advice and consent is about making individualized, good faith judgments, and I think your record gives the American people reason to be concerned about your nomination. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.